This is Monday, and this is Friday, January 16th. And we have some new bills to explore this morning. Psyched about that. So we're gonna start off with 223.
We'll start with
Yeah.
that.
We're gonna take our time. All right, and this is Senator Bongartz's bill. Do you wanna take a minute to explain this?
Yeah, so let me explain what I'm trying to accomplish.
Yes.
We had testimony here last year that I testified about the health of lakes and the extent to which many of them are built effective. And I'm thinking more, we tend to think when we say lakes, we tend to think about the big ones, we tend to think about the plain and the big I'm actually thinking more about all of our gems and interior lakes, lakes, and want to ensure we have a real in on their health. And I want to look at whether we have the right classification system and whether we are part of what I'm hoping to achieve with this is to develop a real web underneath the system of lake classifications and management that actually serves as the basis for making decisions on things as they come up in front of the agency. It just feels to me like it's very scattershot right now. And I'm not sure that the systems we're using are actually designed to protect lake health in its entire ecosystems. And so I had at one point I was looking to actually put in the bill to do it all and realized that it's probably better to step back a little bit, spend the time with the study, and then put some legislation together afterwards. So those are the things I'm actually looking to accomplish with this. I'll let Mike go through the details. That's working with I think. But that's the goal.
Great, super. Welcome our legislative council. Morning.
Morning, how are you?
Pretty good, how are you?
Pretty good. Never did that once. So this is my review, legislative council, just to add some further background to Senator Bongartz's statements. The water quality standards that Vermont has, which are required in the Clean Water Act, basically have classified waters of the state. And frankly, you, the General Assembly, have set the classification for most waters by saying the default is most waters are B2 unless by rule they are reclassified. Well, you know the extent of waters that are in Vermont. There's creeks and streams and rivers and ponds and lakes and wetlands, and the concept of one classification and one set of standards for the multiple very different types of surface waters is, to an extent, it's administratively efficient. It leads to predictable standards, but does it do what is necessary to protect the water quality of the various different types of waters, especially with lakes and how lakes and ponds can be very, very different. You can have the glacial deep lakes like Willoughby, and you can have the kind of shallow, kind of spread out lakes like Iroquois or Joe's. And so how do you regulate them, classify them in a way that is intended to protect and conserve them to the best of the General Assembly's ability? When you look at other states do have classification systems for lakes that are different from their general waters. And those classification systems are often based on the use of that lake. Or the nature of the lake, whether it's, pristine, high elevation, it shouldn't be used, it shouldn't be developed. And when Senator Bongartz and I were first talking about it, we looked at a couple of states and looked at how they do their classifications, and it's a possibility. There's potential for that in Vermont. But what you also need to work into that is what's called the anti-degradation policy. That's also a federal requirement. And it's a requirement that water quality needs to be maintained at its existing quality if it's meeting standards, or it needs to be improved through a plan or some other way of remediation. Well, if you're managing a lake to the lowest standard of B2, and you're not amending that classification by rule, there's 190 waters in the state that allegedly meet higher standards but haven't been reclassified. Now, I don't know how many of them are lakes or lake segments, but they're still being managed. Well, theoretically, they have to be managed at the higher level. You can't degrade that higher level of quality, but they haven't been identified as that higher level of quality. And so part of what you need to look at with any classification or reclassification or new system is how anti-degradation plays into how you do that classification.
Did you say there were 190 of those
About that.
potentially higher? They could be higher quality, but they're not.
So that
Yeah.
every 2 years, ANR has to go out and assess the status of the water quality of the states. And they do it's a really good report. It's really interesting. It'll tell you like how many miles they are in the state of rivers and how many lakes or acreage of lakes and how many are stressed and et cetera, et cetera. And not this past year, but 4 years ago now, their report said that there were 190, approximately 190 that could be reclassified up and have not yet been reclassified. And so, and I can get you that report and that specifically.
That would be great.
Now, with all of that said, I'll just walk through the bill. On page 1, you're on line 17, section 1. This is creation of a water quality lake classification and anti-degradation study group for the purpose of reviewing and evaluating the existing statutory and regulatory frameworks, policies, and procedures governing water quality and the classification of waters in the state. The group shall recommend to the General Assembly whether the current regulatory framework for waters of the state is adequate and whether legislative policy changes are needed in order to strengthen environmental protection and other public interest in the waters. The membership is 2 members of the House, 2 members of the Senate, Secretary of Natural Resources or designee, and the Department of Conservation Water Quality scientist or technical staff member appointed by ANR, 2 persons from business that interact with water quality, and 2 persons representing nonprofits, environmental advocacy groups, and 1 person representing the Federation of Vermont Lakes and Ponds. That's 11 total members. The study group developed an inventory of the existing water classification designations as set forth in the water quality standards, including high quality waters, water quality data that meets or exceeds the criteria according to classifications. They shall set Vermont's obligations under the Clean Water Act with respect to adoption and implementation of the anti-degradation policies, including any statutory and regulatory requirements, identification of any legal, administrative, or practical barriers to truthful environment. I'm going to stop right there. Federal Clean Water Act requires every state to have an anti-degradation policy. in every state that have a procedure about implementing, to have an implementation process for that. Vermont has an anti-degradation policy. You required ANR to adopt the implementation by rule. You're required to do that by 2016. And that was after extending the date several times. They have still not adopted that implementation by rule. They instead adopted a procedure, which they say is sufficient, but you told them to do it by rule. And they have not. So part of what this will look at is whether or not, for legal compliance with both the Clean Water Act and the state statute, whether the anti-degradation policy, the implementation policy needs to be adopted by rule or put it in statute. Some states have anti-degradation in their statutes. I will note that it's not the easiest thing to digest. So rule probably would be best, whether you're not getting our agency to do rulemaking,
Maybe it's statute.
maybe statute. Moving on, page 3, line 17. The study committee shall assess and identify current and potential threats to water quality of the waters of the state as defined under the water quality standards. Includes an evaluation of whether existing statutory and regulatory frameworks, rules, policies, and procedures are adequate to protect and support the designated and existing use of the waters. Whether management practices effectively minimize the risks to those uses. And then identify and evaluate existing statutory and regulatory policies applicable to waters classified as Class A. And that's the higher standard. And is it enough? Is it working? Are they being reclassified when they meet Class A? And then on page 4, line 8, evaluate whether amendments to the water classification system are warranted. That encompass all classes of surface water, including streams, rivers, lakes, and shall consider whether the modifications are necessary to advance public interest by promoting ecological integrity, health, and functional capacity. And also consider whether separate classifications or systems are needed for rivers and streams and lakes and ponds. As I said, other states have different classifications for lakes and ponds. Then recommend legislative amendments and identify any water quality rules, policies, or procedures that require revision to implement the statute's recommendations.
Yeah, one question.
Sure.
Just as I'm reading now, this idea of functional capacity, can you just speak to what that is?
Sure. So,
Is it like ecosystem services?
it's basically supporting all of the designated uses. So when a state adopts a water quality standard, what they do is they designate the uses of the water that the waters need to be managed for. And so it's things like recreation, drinking water, irrigation, aquatic biota, aquatic habitat, aesthetics. And I'm missing one or two. But then you have to look and see whether or not that water is being assessed for its capacity to support those uses, including over time. And that's
What direction is it going?
Right.
Yeah.
And that report that I talked about that ANR does every 2 years, it will identify lists of different waters. And there's another requirement called the 303 listing. But those lists, they will identify those waters that are impaired, those waters that are impaired that have a plan already. But they also identify the stressed waters, or they don't call them stressed waters. I love having they call them stressed waters. But they're not stressed waters anymore. But they're waters that, because of things like flow or aquatic nuisance species are potentially not going to meet those designated uses in the way that really the lake has the capacity to do. But these things are there, like flow, like in a drought time, or bombazine with all the aquatic invasive species. I mean, that lake has capacity to provide a lot, but the aquatic invasive species are limiting its ability to do some of those things. I mean, I've vacationed there. I stayed above the bridge, you know, on the north end, and it's beautiful, but it's milfoil. Right, and so that's the kind of thing that criteria.
Okay, thank you very much.
The group gets the assistance of A&R for administrative, technical, and legal, and then legal and drafting assistance of legislative counsel. They report to you before January 15, 2027, includes its findings and recommendations. The secretary shall call the first meeting, the committee elects its chair from among the 4 legislators. So that is something you can decide to do or not. It ceases to exist February 1, 2027. I do think the timeline might be a little ambitious. But that's something to discuss with interested parties. You and the appointed members get compensation and reimbursement for 8 meetings. And that's it.
Super. Questions, comments, thoughts? Thank you. That's a useful thing to do. Okay, so we are going to roll right into the next one. 224. Which really has multiple topics. So I'm actually thinking of this as a little bit of like a miscellaneous bill in a way, related to topics having to do with lakes. So there's a few things I want to explain about it. So the first section comes out of a situation that is emerging in Barrie, in which someone applied for a fishing tournament on a body of water that is a drinking water source, and the entire perimeter of that drinking water source is owned by the city of Barrie, and they're we're very alarmed that this fishing tournament permit was granted, and so and having been on the city council when a similar process unfolded regarding Berlin Pond, which is Montpelier's drinking water source. I'll just say I have high sensitivity to the uses of bodies of water that are drinking water sources. I could feel that those ought to be particularly protected. And so one of the difficulties with that fishing tournament is that with the entire perimeter being owned by the city of Barrie, the people would have to have crossed that land in order to get there. It seemed to me reasonable that if a municipality owns the entire perimeter of their drinking water source, that they should be able to control the activities that occur on that lake, especially as they have a very high interest in the quality of that water. And so the first section is really about allowing a municipality that meets those criteria, and so they own the entire perimeter and it's their drinking water source, that they could petition the state to have to be able to regulate the uses on that water. And that, I believe, thanks to legislative council for, helping me track down this number, but I think it might apply to, on the scale of like 11 municipalities in the state of Vermont. Some municipalities have a couple of sources for which that is true. However, so it's a sort of limited set. So that is the first part. The second part is about wake boats. So this is a topic that we've discussed a little bit last year, especially with the possibility that wake boats are very hard to decontaminate. There was this idea of a home lake rule where wake boat would have to would have to be assigned or could choose, I suppose, what their home lake would be, and so then they've got to stick to that lake, which would help with the issue of spreading aquatic invasive species across the state. So that is the second chunk, as I think of it. The third part is about the use of fishing access areas to be used potentially as aquatic nuisance inspection stations, and just making it clear that that is an okay use for those locations. I guess that has been in some dispute in some parts of the state. And then the last part, especially coming out of this situation with the fishing tournament, it was surprising to me that as a part of the fishing tournament application, that there was not a question regarding access. So the last part just requires that as a part of the application that they include a question about access points. So that by granting that permit, the state is not sort of inviting people to trespass. So if there's not a public access point, then they're going to use a private landowner's land to be the access point for the tournament. Do they have permission from that landowner to use that? So that is the gist of all the parts of this bill. Yeah, and I'm interested to see how that lands with a variety of folks. So I'm gonna read.
Okay.
Thank you.
So again, this is Mr. Grady for the state of council. We're going to begin section 1, page 2, line 3. In the use of public water statutory authority. So let's, before we get into the statute of the section, let's discuss the background for this. So the surface waters of the state, by common law, extended by the Constitution, are public waters that are held in trust for the use by the citizens of the state for recreation, commerce, travel, etc. The entity that holds those waters in trust is you, the General Assembly. You are the ones elected by your constituents, citizens of Vermont, to manage those waters in trust for the state. You can delegate your authority to other entities, and you can delegate that authority with conditions. And I would give you an example of public trust lands, because if you fill a surface water with fill, with dirt, sand, whatever, to create land where water used to be, it doesn't take away the public trust nature of that. So then it becomes public trust land. So the downtown Burlington, Echo Center, sailing center, etc. Those are all filled lands. And those are lands that you have delegated the regulation of the control of to Berlin. But when you did it, you conditioned the use of those lands for recreation, scientific, et cetera, et cetera. It's not there for commerce, unless it's intended to the other facilities. And occasionally, Burlington advocates will come in and ask you to amend that, either to clarify a boundary, clarify a use, etc. But that's the level of delegation that you can engage in. You can specifically say, hey, municipality, you can regulate this, but you can only do this type of regulation. And so there is in Title 10, in section 1424, you have delegated the regulation of the use of those public trust waters to A&R. And they are allowed to establish rules for the regulation of those waters. And you can see what those rules are, the scope of those rules on page 2, lines 5 through 16. Nothing's changing there. I'm just putting that there for context. The rules can regulate conduct in an area, it can regulate if boats are allowed, it can regulate if uses are allowed, it can regulate time. One of the other things that this section does already, it's on page 2, line 18, is it allows the secretary to delegate authority for the regulation of public water to a municipality. Authority for delegation of public water is already there for municipality. Like you've already delegated it in session law to Burlington, but you've also delegated authority to Newport for regulation of waters in Newport. And you did that through this statute, where the municipality accepted the delegation by creating a bylaw or ordinance for the regulation of the water. And the secretary proved that it's actually an appendix to the use of waters rule. And so there are opportunities already for delegation. But what this bill would do, it would require the delegation, on page 3, line 6, on a petition of municipal select board for the commissioners of the public water system. The secretary, by rule or written agreement, not just by rule, shall delegate authority to regulate the use of the public water when there are certain conditions that are met. The public water serves as the source of the drinking water for municipally operated public water system. Now, when you have a public water system, you have to identify your source. And that's how Ben Montrose at DEC was able to identify that there are 11 municipalities that will qualify under this, because they had the source permit and he was able to see from the source permit who controlled the land around that source. And thanks to Ben for doing that. And then the municipality that operates the public water system owns or controls all of the public or private land surrounding the public water. And the municipality accepts the delegation by adopting a bylaw or ordinance approved by the secretary for the regulation of the use of the public water. Now, a municipality that has delegated that authority shall comply with and be at least as stringent as the state public water supply requirements and rules adopted under that chapter, but potentially could be more stringent, especially with regard to uses of the water. And then appeals from the final act of the municipality under the bylaw would go to the environmental division, and the secretary would of course have authority to terminate the delegation for cause or without cause upon 6 months' notice.
Question here, yes.
So who's the agent designated to provide oversight that the municipality does what the general assembly tells them to do?
Well, that would be in the bylaw that the municipality has to adopt. They have to adopt who's going to be the regulatory entity for the delegation. What it's they're going to have to basically show A&R how they are going to do it. And then have it adopted at the municipal level.
Then the ANR has to go back and make sure that they comply with that.
Well, A&R still has oversight authority, that's what that page 4 lines 4 and 5, so they can go and they can look for cause for violation. And this type of thing is very citizen focused, you will get complaints if there is not compliance.
So how does the public trust document fall into this? For being able to use the waters for,
Well, that's the thing, you're delegating to this municipality the ability to regulate those uses and to limit those uses, and that is in your authority. Just like the ferae naturae, the animals, the wildlife of the state are also in your public trust. And you get to regulate who, when, how they are taken, or hunted, or trapped, or fished. And so you can say, no, you cannot take that animal. Here you're saying, we're giving to the authority about whether or not to use a lake, or a pond, whatever, to the municipality. If they are a public water system, they can control all of the water, the land around the water, and they have a bylaw that A&R agrees that sets forth how they're going to do it. And controlling use of a reservoir that's used for drinking water is not a unique and unusual thing in the United States. Right, like drive to Massachusetts, you're driving along like 128 and you'll pass by like 3 or 4 like big huge waters and they all have fences around them. Those are drinking water reservoirs. And in Massachusetts, they have the discretion to put up fences and to exclude people. Walk through the neighborhoods of Boston, walk through Cleveland Circle, walk through Jamaica Plain, you're gonna find reservoirs. And they all have fences around. And you know, that is authority you can give a municipality, a public water system, if you want to give them that point.
Thank you.
Moving on page 4, line 6. You're moving out of the public water system regulation of the use of water into wake boats, and it's still something within the use of waters chapter. And you will see some definitions relevant to that on page 4, going on to page 5. And you'll come on page 5 to 2 new definitions. One is of motorboat, and it's cross-referencing the definition of motorboat in Title 23. I thought I brought that with me, but I still left it on my desk, I'm sorry.
It is okay.
And then a definition of wake boat. This is drawn from the use of water tools that already exist. Remember, there were provisions that were added to that rule by A&R regulating, authorizing regulating the use of a wake boat on waters of the state. So motorboat has 1 or more ballast tanks, ballast bags, or other devices or design features used to increase the size of the motorboat's wake. Now, the chair referenced that there had been a rule looking at how to regulate wake boats even further, and one of the provisions of that was the home wake provision. And I just took that provision from that draft rule one, tweaked it for legislative drafting, but put it in this bill. So a person shall operate a wake boat only on a lake authorized by the department, and only in the area of the lake identified for use by a wake boat. And then on page 6, in order to operate a wake boat in Vermont, this person who owns or controls it shall identify a home lake for the wake boat for the given calendar year. A wake boat's home lake is the only lake on which the wake boat shall be used unless the wake boat is decontaminated according to requirements of later on in the subsection. And then a person who owns or controls the wake boat shall display on the wake boat's port side now a current agency issued decal identifying the waypoints on the first county. Page 6, line 10, prior to entering a Vermont lake other than the waypoint's home lake and prior to re-entering a home lake after use of the waypoint at any other lake or water body, the person who owns or controls the waypoint shall decontaminate the waypoint at an agency approved decontamination service provider. Then prior to entering the lake, the law enforcement officer, employee of the agency, or a person staffing an authorized aquatic nuisance inspection station may request that the person who owns, controls, or is using the waypoint provide proof of decontaminated by decontamination service provider. All provisions of the section regarding aquatic nuisance, all provisions of section 1454 regarding control of aquatic nuisance species, they still apply. So there are provisions already in law that a person transporting a vessel to or from the water shall, prior to launching the vessel and upon leaving the water, inspect the vessel and other equipment and shall remove and properly dispose of any aquatic plants, aquatic plant parts, and aquatic nuisance species. You have to drain the vessel prior to transport away. All of that still applies. All of that still applies to this vessel. There's nothing that's different just because it's a grateful.
Just question you.
So do we have a authorized decontamination?
Well, that's probably one of the things you need to talk to A&R and advocates about, whether or not those services are there. And then you need to decide whether or not that's something that will prevent you from, or I don't know, do you care? You know, if there decontamination services aren't there, that means the wake boats can't move. And is that something that you're okay with? And so moving on from there, this would be a judicial bureau offense, just like other use of waters law violations are. Does everyone know what the judicial bureau is? It's a branch of the judiciary that just looks at civil violations and generally minor violations. There's a list of judicial bureau offenses. When you amend the judicial bureau jurisdiction, I recommend that you bring the administrative judge in to notify him and notify the judicial bureau and see if that's something that they're available to. Sometimes they say, no, we don't have the capacity because there's just too many potential violations. And sometimes they say, fine, thus. This is something they basically already do for use of waters. And so I don't think they'll have much resistance, but you just need, I just recommend it because you get out to where somebody asks you to talk to the administrative judge about this and you say no.
Good.
You can see the existing authority for use of waters is already there on page 7, 5, 13, 14, but you're adding that authority in the link provision on this. You're also clarifying some of the existing provisions relating to aquatic nuisance. And I would say that when 1454 was initially enacted, drafted, the concept of when you had to drain your vessel was discussed. And they decided not to like give a time frame, just to say when you leave, you have to drain. But this is saying immediately after you leave, you have to drain. To no longer provide opportunity for debate about. And that is the use of waters rule. We now come to one of my sarcastically favorite subject matters. And that's the Fish and Wildlife Access Area. And I say sarcastically favorite because the department and I have had a difference of opinion about how federal law controls access areas. So let's step back. There is something called the Dingle-Johnson Act and another act related to sport fishing, where there are excise taxes on hunting, fishing, sporting equipment. Those excise taxes are then used and made available to states to pay for a host of activities, but including construction of access areas to provide access to hunting, fishing, and recreational opportunities. And I say recreational opportunities, because the federal law specifically says the access areas need to be available for motorboats and not just motorboats used for hunting and fishing. And so when the states get this money for a project or an access area, there are conditions and restrictions on the acceptance of that money. And one of the restrictions is that it has to be used for the purposes identified in the grant of money. But that doesn't mean it can't be used for other purposes. But the federal law says that if there are other purposes or other uses of the access area and they conflict with the authorized uses in the grant, the priority uses, well, then the other non-priority uses need to go away until the conflict is resolved. It doesn't mean they need to go away forever, but they just need to go away until the conflict is resolved. And can anybody think at an access area where this and why this comes up, why there might be a conflict? Where you want to park your car, or park your trailer park, and that's where the conflicts come up. When people are there using the access areas like parks, and people want to park their trailer or their truck in order to use their vessel on the water. Now, over time, there have been there's been over time, the department has cited people for using access areas that weren't priority uses in a way that seemed unusual. Tourists eating sandwiches at an access area. Person painting a painting. Ice boats. One of our legislative council attorneys got cited for putting in a stand-up paddleboard. Because they're not allowed, because there's a rule that says what is an allowed use and what is not an allowed use. And what is an allowed use are called the priority uses, and they're set out in a priority system. And if you're not one of them, or you don't receive a special authorization from the commissioner, you are not allowed, and you can be cited for using that access area in violation of that. You know that because one of our attorneys got cited. And you can put in a kayak, you can put in a canoe, you can put in a sailboat, but you can't put in a sailboard, which is considered to be stand-up paddle. You can't picnic there, you can't have campfire there, you can't have recreation there, you can't sell anything there. And can't camp there, and there's a few other things. But when you look at other states, they allow certain uses. They allow Alaska, you can camp. Alaska, you can have a barbecue. Other states allow certain activities, but if there's a conflict, those other activities have to stop. Well, why are we talking about this? Because aquatic nuisance inspection stations, something that you basically have authorized in statute, use some of those access areas in order to do the activities and the provisions that are required under law. And some of them have been told that they are using the access areas in conflict of the access area rule because they are not a listed authorized priority use. And they don't have a special authorized use from the commissioner. Well, if you look around the nation at where authorized aquatic nuisance inspection stations occur or are located, lo and behold, they're at other states' fish and wildlife access areas. Now, some of those inspection stations, they were actually given the grant by Fish and Wildlife for that. But some of them, no, it's just an authorized use in that state of that access area. So what this language does is it says on page 10 that fishing access areas may be used by approved aquatic nuisance inspection stations in order to allow for decontamination of wake boats under section 14.4B of the spec or inspection of vessels entering lakes under section 1454 of the spec. Any use of an access area needs to comply with those federal requirements. That federal provision that says if you're going to conflict with the priority use, then that conflict has to go away. But consistent with that federal regulation, if the aquatic nuisance inspection station conflicts with the use of higher priority, the aquatic inspection station shall modify its activities until the conflict is remediated. This section and any rules adopted under it shall not be construed to mean that a conflict exists between a station and a higher priority use when an operator of an aquatic inspection station informs the user of a vessel of the requirement to decontaminate a wake boat or inspect a vessel. Now, why is that language in there? Because when there is a conflict, it's not the wardens that are, affirmatively noticing it. It's the users. The users complain. And so if an inspection station is fulfilling its requirements under 1424B or 1454, you don't want to let users call the warden and say, hey, there's this conflict, there's this station there that's not letting me use the access area, or telling me that I have to decontaminate my boat or show proof of decontamination. That's a conflict with the access area rules. You have to come and get them out of here. If you didn't have this language, I guarantee you that would happen. And so now you have this, and so that's not a conflict.
And we have a question right here.
So where does the funding from Johnson Legal Act come from?
Comes from excise taxes on fishing, hunting, and sporting equipment. And so the users, that's a large. Well, it's a large part of the regulation of fish and wildlife in general. It's like the model has been for decades that the users pay for the right to use skating lands or access areas, either through their licensing for hunting and fishing, or through these excise taxes on fishing, hunting, and sporting equipment. I think none of you are on appropriation.
I am on the. Yeah.
Well, that model is failing. And it's been failing for several years. And the Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department can no longer pay for itself through user fees. And it has been getting a substantial part of its budget from the general fund for years now. And so, and the trend is not looking great. So user fees are going away, but the excise taxes still exist, and the federal conditions for those excise taxes still exist. And as I said, this is one of my sarcastically favorite subjects, because I've been doing it so long. I've talked to US Fish and Wildlife about this, and they say, yeah, you know, you have to give those priority uses priority, and you have to remove the conflict. It doesn't mean that that use can't come back in if it's no longer using a conflict. And their position is, we want people to access waters. We want people to use nature. We want them to go out. Maybe they're not a payer of an excise tax. Maybe they didn't buy a license, but the more you have people using the waters, the more opportunity and potential is there that they become those users that are paying into the system. And that's kind of the concept of Fish and Wildlife. When I talk to them, it's like, don't summarily exclude people, just follow the rule and avoid consequence. Now, I do say that the department has a point that it's administratively more difficult to do that. You need wardens that will probably be called out more often. It's administratively more effective to just say, these are the only allowed uses. And therefore, nothing else can happen unless it has a special authorized use from the commissioner. I think that makes more sense if you were really in a user fee model budget. It's not a user fee model budget. But that's your call. You are the supreme legislative policy makers, so you get to make the call.
Do you have a follow-up question?
So just something I, 9 out of 10 times the disputes I've seen at these access points are real estate. Don't have nothing for parking.
It's always park.
And it could be repaired. We had more real estate where we could accommodate more people that are trying to use those.
Yeah.
sites. I mean, we want people to come use them, so.
And a lot of
this part.
right. Oh,
Oh dear.
I've a lot of it, I would say 8 out of 10 is parking. There's others like people using it for drug activity and things like that. That's a a real need to end that activity, but some of the real estate around these waters is limited. It's often limited by roads. Because ultimately, in order to get to the access area, you need to go on a road to get there. And the road is often the boundary from the access area. So, one of the things that you have the unique, maybe not so unique, but one of the things that you did when you created the Fish and Wildlife rules, you created them in statute. And you said, Fish and Wildlife Board, you can amend those rules, but we get to amend those rules too. And so in section 7, you are amending the use of state controlled fishing access areas, the rule, and you are on page 14, saying an approved aquatic nuisance inspection station is an approved use. It would be last in priority. It is literally the last one, and that means something. So ATVs and snowmobiles used for ice fishing would get priority over it, but it would still be an authorized. And then you will see on page 15, line 14, I just wanted to point this out, maybe because the city council got cited. Launching and recovery of sailboards, raft, no kites, and parking vehicles and trailers supporting them is not allowed. And my colleague was apoplectic. Page 17, line 6, section 8, this is the fishing tournament section that the chair referenced. You will see on page 18 that when an application to hold a fishing tournament submitted to commissioner is gonna be on a form issued by the commissioner. And the form shall require the applicant to identify and access point to the waters for participants in the tournament, and if the access point is on a private right of way, whether the applicant has secured permission to use the right of way or the forest. Now, there have been issues with this over time, usually with the larger tournaments, where parking again is an issue, and the parking for the general access area gets used up, and that leads to overflow. The tournament's gonna have to show that they have some authority for that overflow.
Great. Okay, thank you. There's a lot in there, a lot to talk about. Any questions for our legislative council before we move on? Okay, all right. Thank you so much. Okay, so we have Commissioner Batchelder here. Welcome.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
I'm also joined by general counsel, I think. Just grab a seat, and our access area program manager, Mike Petrowski, who is available if we want to chat with him at all. He's steeped in the nuance of our DJ related access area restrictions, but I think you would have a lot to say in opposition and perhaps counter a lot of what Mr. O'Grady said. But I do know that this has been something of a bone of contention over the years for everyone. So I'm here to talk about S223 and S224. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Jason Batchelder. I'm Fish and Wildlife Commissioner, for the record. I'm the most recent past DEC Commissioner also. I've left that fond memory to the experts. And although they're here today and will be coming on after me. I understand I'm going to be talking a little bit about posted land also. Would we like to just go into that after?
That would be great.
Okay,
Yeah.
happy to do it.
Thank you.
Sure. S223, I don't have a whole lot to get into around that bill. Water quality, lake classification, anti-dag is something that's left to DEC. If there is a study group that materializes from this bill, we would appreciate a Fish and Wildlife fisheries biologist likely to be on the study committee, as the Federal Clean Water Act does establish that a national goal for U.S. waters shall be fishable, and we would like representation on that or on that study.
Sorry, you said a fish biologist. What did you put?
Fisheries biologist,
Fisheries.
yes. Someone from our fisheries staff. You do mention that the secretary will have a designee that would like to be from DEC, but we would ask that if this were to come to fruition, we would also be included for their expertise. And that's really the only input I had.
That's fine.
in 223. Yeah, thanks.
All right, well, before we leave that, are you otherwise, like supportive, neutral?
I feel like we're neutral at this point, without having had a long moment with the secretary and deputy secretary to talk through it. We've been commissioner to commissioner on this one. It seems as though, however DEC lands, we will be there also. Moving on to 224, I think Mr. O'Grady identified very accurately there are four parts to it from our perspective. The drinking water, Thurman W. Dix Reservoir aspect, the home lake aspect for wake boats and decontamination station. The access area rule and the change thereof, and then the fishing tournament aspect. And if I can just jump right into it, drinking water sources, as we all know, as we've had 10 years of history with Berlin Pond, have water treatment facilities that can literally and adequately and literally get anything out of a drinking water source. And so we feel as though this would be an effort to manage a very small problem, which is currently in courts, as I think you know. To tell the full story about Thurman Dix, in 2006, I was the warden who was assigned to patrol that reservoir when it had had decades of only, I'll use air quotes, lawless access. I think that's up for debate. But the city of Barry designated 3 spots on Thurman Dix Reservoir for folks to fish. And they came to me and they said, through channels, I didn't speak directly to city employees. They said, you're the warden here, and I was junior warden, would you patrol these 3 areas so that people can fish? We've had a lot of requests, folks to fish this reservoir. And I was absolutely glad to do it because it is an access to a spot where we hadn't had access lawfully prior. And they did some sort of designating of what would otherwise be an unauthorized ability to designate a use of a public water, in our opinion. Regulating fishing on a public body of water is not something any municipality in the state has authority over. But they did, and we followed along because it was a wonderful gesture for the city to be offering to the people of Vermont. And I had a wonderful 4 years there, checking licenses and bag limits and, writing people littering tickets on occasion, and other stuff, but it was great. And then until recently, that was offered, and unfortunately it's not anymore. But my point being, that the city had the lawful right to post all the way around that lake. And when they offered the access, I think that is when the question was asked, well, if I can go this far, can I get this far? And I think that's to be played out in the courts. I certainly don't want to appear supportive of anything that would otherwise prohibit access to a public body of water, right? It's their land, it's our water. It's their drinking water, but it's the public trust resource offered to the state of Vermont through the Constitution that we want to stick up for no matter what. Fully respecting private land, fully respecting their wishes in the city of Barry to have a public water supply. But if you look around the state, I'm sure Mr. Montross included among those 11, well, maybe he didn't, but we're looking at Lake Champlain, we're looking at the town of Derby, which has cows walking in it. Derby Pond, if you look right there, there's cows walking in that pond. I don't feel as though in the modern era, looking at people as a threat, especially anglers, as a threat to a public drinking water source, as anything other than a small worry. It does not cross my mind at all. And Berlin Pond bears that out. For 10 years, the Berlin Pond has had no issues. I do understand your aquatic invasive species concerns there. We can manage, and we have managed around the state live bait as a department. That's within our ability to manage through the board. If by some miracle, Thurman Dix was open to fishing, which I don't think it's going to, but who knows? We would certainly offer that as a concession for those who are worried about AIS on that lake. Worms, lures, no fish. That would be a concession we would offer. Any questions about my sentiments there?
Something I did not mention is just the threat of safety to those waters. I mean, we have an increasingly hostile environment from a cybersecurity perspective, but in terms of being able to quickly respond, let's say, to a threat, I guess I'll just put that out there as an additional concern, because it's when it comes to people's drinking water, people want to have assurances that it is secure, that it's safe. And so, in terms of contamination of, your run-of-the-mill cows or worms or that sort of thing. It seems like, especially for modern, drinking water treatment sources, that is sufficient. But I mean, are any thoughts on, other potential, actual malicious threats?
No, what comes to mind is a place like Lake Champlain. where I'm not certain how many municipalities receive their drinking water from there. But I also think, I think of the Quabbin Reservoir that Mr. O'Grady might have alluded to. A fence isn't gonna stop anything. If someone is hell bent, they're hell bent. But I think we're talking about a handful of anglers, hypothetically, and eventually here on my sheet, a fishing tournament, which I think is in name only and not in intent. I don't worry about access to waters from anglers or the attention that anglers draw to waters. I think in 2026, it would have worn itself out by now, and I can't predict the future. But anglers are also extraordinarily responsible. And I often get into this battle in my head about who cares more about X, Y, and Z. The people who enjoy it this way, or the people who enjoy it this way. I think the person in question enjoys this place because he loves to eat the bass out of this place. And I would argue that he cares more than I do, because I don't eat bass out of there. But that's his food. So I think he cares in a way that is very, very special about this place, and would go to great lengths to call out any nefarious use of it, which he doesn't think his use is. And I don't. I do hope that all the rules are followed, and I do respect law to a fault, and so I know he knows that also. Anyway.
Great, thank you, and
Of course.
I also have great faith in our anglers as well. One of the other things that you mentioned was that you said for drinking water, you can get anything into it or out of that source. And I guess I just want to flag that as a question mark that I would want to discuss further with
Sure.
some from people who are in the drinking water world about the ability to get anything out.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Madam Chair, and I don't mean to sound like an expert there. I'm sure I've proven wrong.
Well, we'll see.
Sure.
It could be, but we'll find out the limit on that.
In my head, I go back to Berlin Pond and how there were concerns about fossil fuels, ice augers and snowmobiles, and we as an agency were responsive to that. You're not allowed to use a power auger out there. You're not allowed to bring a motorized vehicle out on the reservoir. I think there was some concern about oil and gas. So full disclosure, I would rescind any allusion I gave to be an expert on what they develop. I'd leave that to those fine folks. But thanks for hearing.
Yes, absolutely.
Sure.
Thank you.
Requiring weight boats to designate a home water is more under DEC purview. We're obviously strong supporters of aquatic nuisance spread prevention, including clean, drain, dry, and procedures for all boats. I think it is worth pointing out that there are other methods that do spread aquatic nuisance that we sometimes permit and that we sometimes allow, like the filling of tanker trucks, landscaping, irrigation, filling of pools, things along those lines. And that weight boats are not the only vector. I feel as though you'll hear some wonderful testimony from DEC there. I just wanted to recognize that there is some crossover there. And that if a law were to be passed around the home lake rule, the ordinance would enforce it. And we can find common ground and would certainly follow through. Absolutely. I feel the most problematic of the proposed changes are of the fish and wildlife access area rule proposed changes. I almost feel like jumping out of my seat and letting Mike in here. I'll do my best until he gives me the severed, whatever that's called. We do feel, Mike does feel as though this would be viewed as a loss of control on departmental lands, for which we do receive federal aid. I think that is as far as I really need to go. I will say that this is another issue that we feel is focused on a single kerfuffle at Joe's Pond. And Joe's Pond is simply just too small. And from two aspects of the agency, size of an access area and parking are a thing. But there's also wetlands on both sides, and we feel we would have to expand to accommodate. Folks who know Joe's Pond know that there's some V-Trans land right up the road at the Three Ponds junction, and I feel as though getting that water away and getting a cleaning station away would be to everyone's benefit. I don't know if that's an ideal spot or not, just throwing it out there that we've done quite a bit of thinking about this. And getting those away from access areas is a good idea for a lot of reasons. To give you some inside baseball, we had no joy in saying that there could be no boat wash station at Joe's Pond. We as I said, we value the efforts to combat aquatic nuisance species, and we do want I would say rather look at Mallett's Bay, or look at a larger access area where there isn't so much cramping, and there wouldn't be the ability for the water to get right back into the lake where it came. We work together on these problems routinely, and we certainly will continue to work on this rather than risk the ire of the Fish and Wildlife Service or the federal entity that might look cross-eyed at us for this. I'll go to my last point quickly, and then if Mike wants to jump in and you're amenable to it, I would offer you might fill in many more cracks. But I'll just jump to the fishing tournament part, and then I'll be done until close to my end. So the requirement for fishing tournaments to be named or to name an access point also appears directly aimed at Thurman Dix, which we've acknowledged. And just to say that if you use several other fishing tournaments that come to mind, Lake Champlain is probably too big, but Caspian is a comparable size. And if you were to watch the Caspian tournament on opening day, or any other day of fishing, summer or winter, folks access through private land and without trespassing. In fact, there are at least 2 points on Caspian that have an arrow sign that said fishing compartment this way or fishing access this way. And I actually left a note on one a couple of years ago when I was retired, just to say thanks. And the lady came out, found me, and it was really nice. So they do appreciate the acknowledgement, but we do have other places other than Thurman Dix which is why we don't designate access, because in a state like Vermont, where we do have the right to cross lands that are otherwise not enclosed or posted, you do, and they do it, I would say, every day. That is why we don't designate an access area, and to designate one on certain places other than others probably would not be the end of the world or a policy decision we would want to a hill we want to die on. I just wanted to explain that there are many other places where we don't. Obviously, we don't. Doesn't create any authority for anyone to cross a posted sign or to cross someone's private land if they've been given notice that they can't do that. Those are not free passes to do anything that you want. So I just wanted to point that out, and to say that we certainly would work with you in any way that we could to allay fears around what folks are doing in fishing tournaments. So we can get through this one.
Yes.
Thank you. I'm unclear whether that what you just said means you are supportive or unsupportive of what's in here. It sounds like you don't think it's necessary because people are used to having people parking on their private land because they're next to a place where there may be a fishing tournament.
Not quite. I think to break that apart, let's say we're going fishing at Caspian. I park on the side of the road where dozens of cars, maybe 6 or 7 cars park. And I do walk down someone's private driveway where there is a sign that says fishing access here. People have bought this land while anglers have come and gone for 100 years, and they acknowledge that this happens. They could post, and we would respect that, but that's the instance I'm trying to get at to give you a hypothetical. I do feel like this is a single example problem that we're trying to fix. Whereas this would have a statewide effect if we put it in play, and I just don't, it isn't necessary anywhere else, is my point.
Besides Caspian,
Besides Thurman Dix, Caspian is
Okay.
fine. Right?
okay,
So, just in response to that, so there are 11 municipalities that own the entire perimeter of their drinking water sources. If someone was to try to have a fishing tournament on one of those, it's not the same kind of situation where people are used to having their land trespassed. I'm anticipating that there may be more of these kinds of attempts to have fishing tournaments on otherwise,
Sure.
inaccessible, like that. This was new. I guess I could imagine that it could be a problem elsewhere. So in a sense, trying to get ahead of it, if someone did try to have a tournament on one of these other bodies of water, according to the application as it exists now, yeah, I assume you would grant that permit.
We would grant it, yes. I haven't had a chance to look at those other 11 drinking water sources where a municipality owns all the way around. I suspect that they may not meet other criteria that we would ask for, and I would have to study that. It may not be of a certain size. I'm not steep enough in how many cross references we have to come through to grant a permit. I'm happy to do that for you though. And I will for my own knowledge, and I'll get back to you on it.
And in addition to the examples that you used with the Caspian, is there, sure, so yes, there's maybe a lot of private land that people are inviting the public to use as an access point. Is there a public access point just anyway, that if those people did not allow people to cross their land, is there a specific public access point that someone could use at Caspian?
So that is a wonderful question. We do not have official wildlife access at Caspian. So the town beach, I believe, is owned by Hardwick Electric. Next to it is some town land. That is this government land, and until otherwise posted, that anyone could use. But if that's a yes, then yes. So, but we do not have official wildlife access at Caspian.
Okay, so it's not official wildlife access, but there is towns or public.
There is a town beach there where
Yeah.
people swim, and there is a boat launch at the adjacent town land.
Mhm.
So if you have to look at a map to see who owns the sliver, and maybe Mike knows exactly, or Laura knows. But there is an access where you can launch a boat. There's a breeder there for aquatic nuisance control. It's a lovely spot. It does get low. They're both susceptible to drought. But we would consider that a public place. That's where all the anglers go now that need to launch with a boat or a kayak or canoe.
Mhm. So that could theoretically be a point that someone could say.
They would. And they do have the town government land just adjacent to there that is not part of the access area, but I'm not sure there's a parking lot there, just limited town land. But they would like.
Question?
Not for Commissioner.
Okay,
No, Mr.
okay, super.
Okay, and posted land, or would you like to bring Mike up? Mike's an absolute expert, but
Let's go to Mike first.
Okay,
And then we'll come back, is that okay?
wonderful,
Amazing, thank you.
thank you. I'm just gonna leave my stuff up here, though, okay?
Welcome,
Thank you.
and if you could say your name.
Yep, Mike Petrowski, I'm the Texas Area Program Manager for Fish and Wildlife.
Go ahead.
So, yeah, the commissioner touched on the issue, the biggest concern now with the access area, both modifications is that loss of control. Maybe I should back up in a moment, say we fully support breeder programs, the AIS, kind of education programs that are slightly different than decontamination stations. Decontamination stations are those that have wash stations of some sort that can wash boats. They typically take up a little bit more space, but at our access areas outside of Lake Champlain, there are probably, we have 146 boat ramps, and we probably have something like 40 different breeder programs operating at our access areas. Some of those do have wash stations. And as the Commissioner said, The problem is that, when there's space issues, even Mr. Grady mentioned that, when there are parking space issues, that's where we have problems. And so going back to that comment about loss of control, if this becomes a priority use, currently we permit them. And if it's priority use, then we really don't have the ability to tell people, lake associates primarily, that you can't be here. Because now they may be taking up 2, 3, 5 parking spaces. Joe's Pond, for example, you can maybe get 10 vehicles with trailers if you're parking really, really well, and everyone's getting along. But the reality is, it's probably more like 7 or 8, and just continuing on the Joe's Pond example, it would probably take away at least 2 parking spots on a pretty big and extremely popular lake. If you're down to 6, 7 parking spaces, that's a loss of use. And so the priority for our
Just for clarity, the boat wash station would take up 2, is that what you were saying?
as it's proposed, as
Okay.
they propose. So the typical process now is a lake association or sometimes a watershed group will come to Fish and Wildlife and say, hey, we'd like to have a greeter program or a wash station here. And okay, give us your design or what are your thoughts on what you want to do, where you want to have it. And then it's kind of a yes or no. If they're big parking lots, Seymour Lake and Morgan, huge parking. They've got a pretty good size footprint, doesn't impact boating or access at all because we have so much space. And we work with them pretty frequently, and we've never had any issues there. But we still permit it every year. We issue a special use permit, commissioner has to approve. If you have much smaller access areas, I live in Calais, Curtis Pond is in Stanford. There's not a lot of parking space there. So they've had off and on the town has had a greeter program. It's typically a car parked on the side, somebody in lawn chair. That's not an issue. But when you want to have, say, a wash station, typically it's something like a horse trailer or a shed and Curtis Pond or Joe's Pond, you're going to take away parking. As soon as you start to take away parking, there's a loss of access. If we don't have the ability to permit it, and as the rules, the statutes proposing, it would be a priority use. So there's no ability for us to permit or deny that greeter program or wash station. So now we've lost control over the activities that are occurring at the access area. As the rule is written now, you can hunt, fish, trap, and boat at those access areas. Those are the things that the federal government says we have to allow. So in our rules, the priority uses are the things that we have to allow. So you can do any of those things, and we want to do this. So that's why those areas are there. We want to protect water quality and reduce the spread of aquatic nuisance species. And we do that at access areas where we can, where there's space that is allows for that. And we work quite a bit with lake associations or some watershed groups, maybe municipalities, to try and figure out the best approach. And we've tried that again with the Joe's Pond example, looking at some other spaces, but the reality is where they want to put it, they're going to encroach into a wetland. The water is going to get discharged into a wetland. And it's problematic. And that's just the one that comes to mind because it's been the most recent and been communicating with the Joe's Pond Association on that. So I'll stop there if there are questions.
Good.
There's a question, are you required to have ADA accessibility on service too?
Yes, and with a caveat. So there are different ADA laws. The original was 1992. Then in 2010, there was an update to the federal ADA rules. And in those rules, there are standards for recreational boating facilities. And pretty much any ADA law, as I understand it, if you've got an existing facility, it's not required to be accessible. Once you upgrade it, it has to be accessible. So 2 years ago, we wrote a plan, ADA transition plan. I don't know of any other in the state. And that transition plan is basically a roadmap. It gives a snapshot from 2024 and then a roadmap for the next 5 years, how we're going to get from where we were in 2024 to where we want to be 5 years down the road when it comes to accessibility. So anytime we put in a new dock, upgrade a boat ramp, or dramatically change the facility, we are creating accessibility. Out of our 205 access areas today, we have 74 that are accessible. Our goal is to have 50%. And we've got 3 years to get that 50% mark. And our goal is also to have that kind of equitably distributed around the state. You know, not every site on Lake Champlain is going to be accessible. We want to ensure that folks down in Ludlow or Springfield also have the ability, they don't have to drive to Lake Champlain. So in those examples, we just put a new dock at Lake Rescue in Ludlow, and it is accessible. So that says, I believe it is now fully accessible.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I'm not clear on your point about loss of control, because it seems to me like we are just adding the ability to use the space for aquatic invasive control that feels like a pretty limited expansion of what the uses are. So I guess I'm not clear on your.
Sorry if I didn't.
No, it's okay, yeah.
So, the way the statute is proposing the changes. A lake association, for example, could go and put in a wash station whenever they want. And if we don't know about it, they could, in theory, take over half the access area and say, oh, well, there's nobody here. What's the harm? But if it's a cold, rainy day on Tuesday, well, there might not be a lot of people there. But if it's a weekend, 4th of July, holiday, that parking area could probably triple in capacity. And so now we don't have the ability to say yay or nay, and we can't tell a lake association, you gotta pull up your stuff for the holiday, for the weekend. Lake associations are actually pushing to allow their infrastructure to stay year round. They've asked for that repeatedly, and we've told them, no, you can't have it year round. And so there needs to be some communication, there needs to be some back and forth, there needs to be an approval process, and that's where the permit comes in. We rarely deny it, but having the ability to do so keeps that control in our hands. Once we don't have that ability, we lose that ability to say yes or no, you can put it here or not, or modify their request. Once we lose that ability to do that, now we've lost control of the facility.
So if this is, I guess I'm going back to the testimony that Mr. Grady gave us, which is that if there is a conflict, that the priority, the priorities are in priority.
Yeah.
And so that you would, could you, because this is literally the last priority, that it seems to me that you would be able to say, no, these other things are happening, and so
that's-
those have to take priority still. So you need to go until there's not a conflict anymore.
So that would require a warden to go out there on a Friday afternoon and say, Lake Association, you have to take your trailer, go find your flatbed, your piece of equipment, and haul it away for the weekends. And then, yeah, maybe you can bring it back because it's just the weekend that these sites are busy. Nobody wants to do that. Certainly the Lake Association is not gonna be happy with a warden saying, you need to pick up your stuff and go home. You can only be here Monday through Thursday. They want to be there on the weekends. That's the busiest time of year. That's the best time to interact and educate voters and potentially intercept aquatic nuisance species. So they want to be there at those busy times. And of course, that's when we want them there to educate the public, but we have to ensure there's not a conflict. And having this very wishy-washy, like you can be here today, but not tomorrow. It's kind of an unworkable situation. It would require the wardens or myself, and I have one other staff person with me that works for me to cover the entire state. And again, there's no approval process. So at what point does the commissioner or the department get to say, yeah, you can be here, or you can be here if you modify your program, your footprint in this way?
Have a comment from Mr. Grady.
The language says it has to be an approved aquatic nuisance inspection station. So if you need further clarity on what that approval involves, including the ability to not approve it. I think that could be added.
My understanding, okay, thank you for that. My understanding is the approval typically comes from DEC on an inspection station. So DEC will approve the inspection stations, ensure that the folks are educated properly, and then they will come to Fish and Wildlife to get that approval through a permit. And so if there's an approval language that needs to be added, it's kind of pointless, because that's the process we go through now, is to get the approval through the permit. So you'd be changing the rules to what ends? I mean, what would be the point of the change if language can be added in for approval? I mean, it's a pretty simple approval process as it is today. It's a one-page permit. I issue 40 of them a year. I don't know how many I deny. It's less than one a year. I guess it's not broke. Why the change? Why the push for the change? That would be my question.
So one of the things that I think about with all of this is the acknowledging of that this is a it falls on the list of priority uses. And there are things that are prohibited here for sure, but it seems to me that there's I think it would add, I think it adds clarity to the process, and acknowledging that this is a thing that we value and that we want to see happen. It also seems to me that if something is taking up 1 or 2 parking spaces, in the service of protecting the aquatic life of the pond or lake or whatever, that has some value, even for the other purposes that we've acknowledged are our priorities. So it feels to me that it is appropriate to have it in the mix, as we want to protect the wildlife that is one of the attractions for people to fish in the first place.
So, sorry, go ahead.
So,
Yeah.
you said you talking about the committee or you and, Senator Thomas?
Oh, I think in terms of, I was thinking actually in terms of, the angling recreating community that we value having, high quality, I guess I should say healthy wildlife, as part of the attraction. So I was speaking generally. Yeah.
The way the rules are written today, we have our priority uses, which are, in other words, those are the allowed uses. And then we have a list of the prohibited uses. And then anything that's not listed as prohibited can be specially permitted through a special use permit. We can't, so those things that were listed as prohibited were identified as conflicts in 2006 when the rule was promulgated through the Fish and Wildlife Board. So the public said, these are the things that we do not want to see at access areas. That's why those things are there. Very clearly, what is not there are AIS inspection stations, decontamination stations. So they're not a priority use, they're not allowed. People can't just go there and do it. The only things that people can go there and do are the things that both Vermont Fish and Wildlife and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has said, we want you to be here to do these things, which is hunting, fishing, trapping, boating, and activities, engaging in those activities. So parking for boating or whatever. There's other things that we may allow, or say, perfectly fine doing these things there, but they're not listed as priority uses because there could potentially be a conflict. We allow weddings to happen in our access areas. We allow different meetings to happen in our access areas. We get calls all the time. Hey, I met my fiance here 10 years ago fishing. We want to have a wedding. When do you want to have it? On Saturday in June at some random access area. We permit it. And so similar to the breeder program, if we don't feel there's going to be a conflict, we can permit it. We tell them, well, you can be there for a very specific amount of time. We don't allow too many vehicles. We know there's not going to be a lot of activity going on in that time of year, so we're not gonna allow that same activity to happen on the 4th of July, because it'd be very busy. But we do allow a lot of kind of different things that you might not think are allowable. But we do allow them because it's not a conflict. We've never gotten a call saying, hey, there was a wedding at this site, it was terrible, we've never gotten those calls.
how would you feel about taking picnicking off of the list and prohibited activities?
The example that I give, and the commissioner could back me up on this thing. If somebody's out there and they've got a picnic basket, and they got a line in the water, and they're having lunch and enjoying the day, you're fishing. Great, you're fishing, go ahead and do it. But Vermont is a very attractive state. People love to drive around, pull up, hang out. I can't tell you how many times I see people sitting in their vehicles, just looking at the view, having lunch. Really not affecting anybody. No warden's gonna go out there and ticket somebody saying, we gotta leave. But if you're not engaged in those activities, certain times of year, it could become a conflict. If we allow that to happen, and then what's the difference between that happening and Mr. Grady mentioned the painting, and now you start this little creep of we're allowing all these other little activities, we're not parks. And in some of our big access areas, it might not really matter, but by and large, a lot of our access areas are very small. And if you get a couple extra vehicles there not engaged in fishing or boating, now you start to get a competition for that space. And that's the big issue, is the competition for space between those prior uses, people fishing and boating, and all the other things people want to do that they might do at state parks and municipal parks. And we can't start to divide and cut. Well, you can do it at these access, you can picnic at these access areas, but you can't picnic at these access areas. Because we have 205 of them, and we every year add 1 or 2, and so it just starts to really muddy the waters. Where can you do these things? Where can't you do these things?
No pun intended.
Yeah, and it gets difficult, so the department's always tried to hold the line. You're boating, fishing, hunting, or trapping, go ahead, do it 24/7, we're not gonna ever bug you or ask you any questions. Anything beyond that, maybe we can issue a permit for the wedding, or something like that.
Okay, a lot of these places that you're talking about, I've never been to, so I can't visualize them in my head, I just know the ones in my area.
Where's that?
Addison district, so like Lake Dunmore,
Yep.
Lake Champlain, places like that. But that being said, I also not exactly familiar with how to decontaminate a wake boat. I don't have a wake boat, but does it involve spraying water on it, or does it involve just like taking the stuff off of it? And what does it involve?
I'm not an expert, but what I can tell you is that there's been some research. And for decontaminating boats in general, there's a requirement that if you wanna, say kill the zebra mussel villagers, the larva, you have to apply hot water for a certain amount of time. And it's not hot water coming out of the nozzle of the spray, it's hot water coming off the boat to ensure that that boat is being hit with hot water. So it's like 140 degrees coming off the boat after hitting the boat for say 2 minutes. So if you're putting in the bows, which are the tanks you'd have to spray that hot water into those ballast tanks for a certain amount of time. And some of them are up to 1,000 gallons. So that's a lot of water, hot water that has to be, I'm not saying you have to fill it with 1,000 gallons. But you know, there's certain apparatuses that you can put on this way.
Okay. I'm just trying, I hear you about the access areas being cramped at some of these places and not having, and if these things take up a couple of parking spaces, there may be issues. Is there another place that you could say, if you have a wake boat, you need to go and get your boat decontaminated before you go to this pond?
There's been a lot of discussion about that with myself and DEC staff and some of the lake association folks. There's been a I don't know if it's formal committee or group that, Kim Jensen and her group, the AIS folks within the DMC have been organizing just meetings to have these sorts of conversations and try and figure out where can we put these? I'd like to think municipal or properties or AOT garages, you know, especially like on the weekends, have not a lot of people there. And I don't know what kind of security and access issues there are, but if there are somewhat centrally located places, big parking lots that have some sort of drainage, paved or gravel would work. You know, trying to center them in some way around the lakes that do allow wake boats would be ideal. And I don't have a map and
Right,
where
it
those.
seems like if you put one centrally located and people are like, I'm gonna go to, I don't wanna name a place that doesn't. Cause like I said, I don't know
Yeah.
most people, but it's gonna go to X pond or X lake to do your wake, you know, be on your wake boat for that weekend. You have to go get it decontaminated at the station, you have to get a little ticket that shows you did it, and then you show the warden at the access area if they ask. Did you get that decontaminated? Is that something that could work? And then you don't clog up the access area?
In theory, yes, but now you have to like. So you have to have that centrally located decon location. You have to have somebody there that's going to decontaminate that boat. And then give them some sort of validation.
But don't you have to have that if you have them at the access areas too?
No. If you have them at the. There. Well, maybe back, can you clarify that question?
Well, I mean. I don't have a dog in this fight, so I'm just trying to figure out how.
I understand, I understand.
So I may be completely way off, it's not my area of expertise, talk to me about schools, but if you have one of these stations at a fishing access area. And somebody comes with their wake boat, and let's say it's under current law or this law, whatever, but it's just one of these stations. Somebody comes to do their wake boat, there's a decontamination or what decam is that?
Decon.
Decon, okay, cool. There's a decon station, they gotta spray it off, they gotta inspect it. And then they're like, good to go, you can go in the water with your boat. So somebody has to be there at the access area doing all that stuff too, right? And approve it, making sure they're all good to go. So it's just a matter of where the station is.
Yes and no. So, a few things. Those stations aren't staffed 24/7. They're not open 24/7.
Yeah.
So those stations are staffed when that lake association municipality thinks it's the busiest time to catch the most
Right.
people.
So this other place could be too.
It could, so you probably have them there like Friday, Saturday, Sundays, holidays.
Right.
So it absolutely could happen. But there's a big funding piece.
Yeah,
That's probably one of the biggest issues is like, who's gonna pay for it? And they have to be centrally located enough so that, you know, if somebody wants to go from, say, Lake Champlain to Dunmore. Or maybe it's a bad example, Lake Champlain up to somewhere in the Northeast Kingdom. You know, they're somewhere in between, they don't have to go down to Bristol or, you know, Rutland to get decon. And then go all the way up to Northeast, they have to be reasonably located, somewhat centrally located. So that people will actually use them.
and we're just talking about wake boats here, not every kind of boat, right?
I'm glad you asked that question.
And that's what the bill says, just wake boats, so there are
So-
only a certain number of lakes that allow wake boats.
Yes, so
You've got this really cool mapping tool. I mean, Senator Bongart's an expert on this, so maybe you could create a map about where the best place to locate.
Right. But one thing I do wanna bring up. 28,000 registered boats in the state of Vermont, roughly. There's maybe 300 wake boats, there's less than 1%.
And
So
so
we're,
where are those wake boats and where can we put the things?
we don't exactly know that, I would say Lake Champlain for the most part, but the reality is like. When we're talking about 1%. Boat to boat, bass boat, pontoon boat to wake boat, a wake boat is a bigger risk. But when you have 300 versus 27,700. Where's the risk? It's not with weight boats. That is such a minuscule risk.
It's all the filters of all those.
So when we talk about like decon stations are a good thing, but we shouldn't just focus on weight boats. We need to focus on.
Cool, well then we could do boat decon stations. I'm just trying to solve the problem. This feels like an easier problem to solve than other problems we have, so. I
I just want to acknowledge that we're gonna need to take a break relatively soon, but I want to go to Senator Williams and then.
We have a reciprocal agreement in New Hampshire too. If we can, like, we register in Vermont, we can go to New Hampshire. Can we accept votes from other states too? So that compounds the number, right?
Oh, absolutely, that would definitely, yes. Any boat registered in another, as long as you're legally registered in any other, not just New Hampshire. We get people that come from North Carolina and they'll rent a place for a month and go fishing on Lake Champlain. That happens a lot, and so it's not just New Hampshire or Vermont. There's 28,000 registered Vermont boats. We certainly have significantly more boats than that in Vermont.
Thank you.
Do you have any idea of the 300 weight boats, how many of them actually aren't conforming to the home lake rule on their own anyhow?
I'm gonna let DC answer. I think Laura might know much better.
No?
Um,
How many of them move around?
Very few.
If you could introduce yourself.
Oh, sorry, yes, my name is Laura Lucky, and I work in the Lakes and Ponds program for the Department of Environmental Conservation. So these are the boats that we tracked at our public access greater area stations. We count how many boats enter and what type of boat they are. So this past summer, we had 17 wake boats that moved between lakes. All the other wake boats, I think there were about 120 launches that we counted. They all were returning to the same lake. And so even under the home lake rule, boats are allowed to travel between lakes, that's not forbidden. They just are required to have a decontamination. So we are only talking about 17 boats this year. Last year, in 2024 was 23 boats. So it's a very small amount of boats that are moving. And a lot of them are coming from Lake Champlain, which does have the capability to provide those hot water decontaminations at the Lake Champlain Basin decon stations.
which those are at Fish and Wildlife Access areas.
So you could have a decon station. If it's limited to weight boats, they might have 2 or 3 visits a year. I mean,
That's the reality.
We want all water craft to get decontaminated, it's not just wake boats,
Okay.
or especially ones that are high risk, like if we know they're coming from an infested water body that perhaps did have some mussels, we would prioritize that one for decontamination.
And that was kind of my point, is where there's a hyper focus on wake boats. But we have all these other boats that are in the same water, potentially moving. Boat to boat, less risk, but the reality is the risk is in all the other boats, so
Yeah.
there's, wake boats are being vilified. I think they're getting a lot more blame,
I would love to ask more about just boat washing in general for non-wake boats and how we're doing with that. But I also want to recognize that we are running out of time. Thank you so much.
and on the wake boat, or
Yes,
I would go to DEC when it comes to decons, to Laura and some other staff. They're gonna be much more educated on
okay,
that.
fair enough. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now I do want to acknowledge we have not talked about posting yet. So what I'd like to do is take a 5-minute break and then we'll come back. We'll come back to you to talk about Commissioner Batchelor to talk about posting.
I'll be quick.
Okay, great. After our 5-minute break, and then we're gonna move on to a different topic. So, thank you so much. Okay, all right, Business and Natural Resources and Energy, still, oh, I think we've got.
Sorry, that's
Okay. And just pause and pause seconds. Okay, we're good, okay, no worries, all right, so it's still Friday, January 16th, coming back from a break. We're back to Commissioner Batchelder, welcome again, and we're talking about land posting.
Yes.
Okay.
So we have I have a small story for you and hopefully, a conclusion and a story, with an end. Jason Batchelder, Fish and Wildlife Commissioner, I came back to the department, I retired game warden for 20 years. And came back around, late July, among the issues that the department brought to me was some confusion around, 10 VSA 5201 and a mirrored commissioner's rule, I believe it's rule 14 in the appendix that governs our person's ability to post. And a line in there that says dated each year, which you're probably all familiar with now, and the confusion that dated each year caused to you name the individual, and up to including me and wardens, town clerks, landowners, and attorneys of the prosecutorial side and the defense side. Dated each year, if you think about that line, can mean a lot of things, and it would be confusing if you drill into those three words. And also keeping in mind that signs must be registered each year. Or registered annually, so two different terms there. So dated each year. Let's say you posted your land on October 1st. And I'm mixing it around in my head, jumping around, so hopefully you can follow and please ask questions. You posted your land October 1st of 2025, come January 1st of 2026. Looking at the words dated each year can cause some folks to scratch their head. And so invariably we get a lot of questions each year, and to include, and I don't mind giving you some inside baseball. Wardens like to be sure when they enforce, right? They like to be sure when they enforce the law. And if they're not 100% sure what a statute or a law says, they will ask questions and they will see things through to the end, obviously, and come to a resolution, but they may not prosecute. They're hand in glove with their prosecuting attorneys, and they may not prosecute. And prosecuting attorneys may not prosecute. Defense attorneys may find a leak in that cup that says dated each year. That science is 2025. This is 2026. It is no longer this year. You did not date this year. And so they wouldn't prosecute, right? We've looked for how many cases that we've had. They're hard to find since they don't exist if we didn't prosecute. But they're out there. And this the colonel brought this to me, and I worked with counsel on whether or not we should come up with a solution to this. And we decided we would. I feel now that I should have thought harder about what we were about to do, because it's caused a lot of consternation across the hunting, private land community and others. And I'm sorry for all the work that it's caused you through your constituents. But I think my effort, which it is my effort, fell on its face. There's no doubt about it. What we did was causing people a lot of angst around a time when they had to post their land, which we said was going to be January 1st through December 31st, right? And backing up again, when we thought to solve this problem, we wanted to give landowners 365 days of unfettered posted land. So if they needed prosecution, that we could give it to them. Understanding that town clerks are closed on January 1st and probably the 2nd and the 3rd, depending on where you live. Some town clerks are open very sporadically. We took all that into consideration. But understanding people's right to post and to keep people off their land that they don't want there, it was still not a good time of the year for me to choose. So what we have done is been open about honoring posted signs. I guess there's another thought I want to add. As many problems as there were with this language, there were times when we were able to prosecute, given the situation that I told you about, right? And so of our 9,000, roughly 9,000 calls last year, only 49, 51. There's someone in this room that could certainly tell you exactly how many calls we had. It's around 50 calls per posted land. One half of 1% of our calls are related to posting. It's a non-issue. It's a non-issue when people call and complain. Or the frequency with which people call and complain. And there may be other calls that aren't captured if they're just a phone call to a warden, but prosecuting cases of posted land, when I check, it's 49 out of 8,500. And we closed the year with more than that, so that's why I'm rounding up to 9,050. And it's a good time to say that there's a reason for that. Vermonters respect posted signs and they respect private land. 99.9 times out of 100, right? That is something that I will defend and stand up for. As much as we want access to land, we want open land, and depend on private landowners for the access to their land. We do defend private land, and wardens do it whenever they're asked to. So when we tried to solve this issue, we wanted to give these folks, these private landowners, 365 days of posting. When that sign says 2026, it had to mean it, right? Date of each year, without any ambiguity, had to be 365 days within that year. But it did fall on its face, right? So we have come back, we have looked internally, we have told folks that we were going to honor their signs and certainly investigate at least, which we never said we wouldn't do. And for the record, we didn't change any laws. We made an administrative decision. We changed no laws, no rules. We sent a letter to town clerk, and here we are. Backing up, I have agreed to enter into commissioner's rulemaking. I have said so to many important people, including you, Chair, and Chair of House Environment, and others. We feel we have the authority through rule to fix this and put a definition into Rule 14 of what data needs to be. And we plan to have a public process, at least a couple meetings, where we'll meet with some of these affected landowners, north and south, or north and middle, or middle and south, part of the state, where the Colonel and I will meet with these private landowners and ask what data each year would best mean to them. I hypothesize it's going to mean from the time that they choose to post their land until that day the following year. That's what I'm guessing most people will land on. If they land on October 1st to September 30th, that might work. I certainly want to respect what we have grown to know as a right to hunt state, and it shouldn't be it shouldn't be an easy thing to keep someone from hunting a public trust resource. But I've said many times we are beholden to the private landowner. We would be nothing without them, and we respect all private land. So I want to make this very clear and very tight for people who do want to post. So let's say we're here next year. Ideally, we will have a rule that says date of each year means from the time you post, let's say it's January 17th of 2027, that will be encapsulated in that rule. I don't feel like we are being any less stringent than the statute. I feel like we're being more stringent than the statute. And Mr. O'Grady will certainly have thoughts about this, and our council will too. But I feel as though this will solve it, and will give people the ability to post 365 days, still have to register, which will be a factor as to when that registration date, what that registration date means to their posting date. But that's fixable also. And I feel like we can do it by the time that the meaningful hunting seasons arrive, which we consider around September 1st, big game season.
Thank you. Well, and I just want to thank you for recognizing there was a problem and then moving on into the process that you're going to do in terms of having meetings, getting public feedback. I think that's really important and fabulous. Comment or question?
Just that, the problem that 1 ward year causes, because we have different fiscal dates that begin and end on, and then we have some entities that operate on a calendar year. So, if we can all get on the same calendar, then everything would be so much simpler legislatively too.
I want to briefly go to our legislative counsel, Mr. O'Grady, about your thoughts on whether or not the commission has, or the, right, if the commissioner has the authority to amend this rule, on.
So this is Michael Grady with Legislative Council. There is already an existing rule. That rule cites for its authority 10 VSA Rule 5201B. And 5201B says that the commissioners shall have the authority to establish the standard size and design of the signs for posting. In that same subsection, there is the language at issue about shall be dated each year. I admit that is open to interpretation. And so I believe for the signs, the commissioner has authority by rule to specify what that means. With that said, the last time the rule was amended or actually enacted in 1996. After 1996, you passed a law that said if the rules were not published in the Vermont Code of Rules by 2018, they were automatically repealed. I checked on all these old rules to see if they were published. Some of them have not been published, not from the Fish and Wildlife Board or the commissioner, but this rule was at question. I went to Lexis to see if it had been published. Lexis couldn't confirm that right away. Our publisher did some work and ultimately confirmed that the rule had been published by 2018 in the Vermont Code of Rules. So it wasn't repealed automatically. With that all said, you are the supreme policymaker. If you want to change what it means to be dated each year, that's your policy, that's your authority. And you can do it much quicker than rulemaking, and it will be in place by hunting season. So I would note that the authority that the commissioner is exercising is delegated legislative authority, which is your authority.
Okay. Any other thoughts or questions on post? Okay, all right. Thank you, appreciate
Oh, my pleasure.
your coming in today. Okay. Marissa, any questions?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it's just a question of whether we want to allow them to do it by rule or whether we want to do it.
Just tell them.
Do it by statutes. There are bills on the wall. I have one that I could introduce that would be a vehicle, but I think it's just, I mean, it is faster.
It is faster, that is true. Okay, well, let's continue to talk about that. Thank you so much. Okay, so we are, we take like a 1 minute break? I know, we're just chat really briefly.
Okay,
Sure. We're gonna take a quick 1 minute break. There you go. Great, thank you for that brief pause, that was helpful. All right, so sticking with 224, and 223, if you want to talk about that. There. We have Ms. Sargent here with us today from BC. Welcome.
Thank you so much. For the record, my name is Bethany Sargent. I am the manager of the Monitoring and Assessment Program. in the Department of Environmental Conservation, and I'm going to be talking about S-223. And just so I'm aware of time, there's a hard stop at
11:30.
11:30.
Like 14 minutes.
Okay. Looking over at my colleague Laura, who is scheduled to testify.
You may.
Yeah, this is,
That's right, exactly.
this is an incredibly rich topic that could be spoken about for hours. I'm going to try to do a very brief flyover and give you the fundamentals of the elements of S-223. So the water quality standards, classification, anti-degradation, and the work that the agency has done over the last several years on those topics. So first of all, the Vermont Water Quality Standards. So I was here on Wednesday talking about what happens when waters don't meet the minimum criteria when we spoke about chloride. And now I'm going to be talking about what happens when waters exceed those or are better than those minimum criteria. So the Vermont Water Quality Standards have primary components. So our designated uses, those are the uses, the values that we must protect in our waters. So aquatic biota, habitat, aesthetics, swimming, fishing, boating, as a public water source, irrigation. So those are the what of what we're protecting about our water. We also have management objectives, which drill down a little bit further, and then minimum water quality criteria. So what is it about the water that supports that use that we are protecting? The other element of the standards is the anti-degradation policy, which Ledge Council Grady spoke about earlier this morning. And that is essentially how the agency evaluates how much water quality can be limited or degraded through our permitting processes above the minimum criteria. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a moment. So S-223 also addresses classification. And so each designated use is classified independently. And 10 VSA 1253 establishes the classifications for Vermont water. So A1 are our highest quality waters. They need to have VBEX water quality. B1 is a step below that, and then B2 is essentially good water quality. A1, B1, and B2 are all termed high quality waters. So that is sort of a term of art. That means they're not impaired. They meet the minimum water quality criteria. So the legislature classified through 10 VSA 1253 all waters above 2,500 feet as Class A, and all waters below 2,500 feet as B2. So we consider B2 as our default class of waters. And I should point out as well that that same statutory language says that the agency, either of its own initiative or by petition, should reclassify waters in the public interest. And that is a piece that's important because that raises the question, what is in the public interest? So a little bit more about anti-degradation before we get back to that. So as I mentioned, the purpose of anti-degradation is to limit that incremental water quality degradation above the minimum criteria to protect those uses. It is considered, if you think about the designated uses as the what, anti-degradation is the how, the when, and the why. So the when is during the analysis of a new or increased discharge when we have a permit that requires compliance with the water quality standards, or when we are developing a permit that requires compliance with the water quality standards. The anti-degradation decision requires public notice, so that happens when we notice a permit, a draft permit, and any permitted lowering of water quality above that minimum criteria needs to be justified. That justification is to avoid substantial adverse socioeconomic harm. So that is called the essentially that test that needs to be passed in order to allow that incremental degradation. Or in order to maintain uses, otherwise we would be permitting to that minimum water quality criteria. So it is a lot more complicated than that, but that is in essence what the purpose of anti-degradation. So in October 2021, the agency convened a stakeholder group with municipal representatives, environmental advocates, representatives from the regulated community to develop a proposed anti-degradation goal. As O'Grady mentioned this morning, we are functioning under an 2010 interim anti-degradation implementation procedure. We reviewed that procedure and developed a draft rule. We filed that in December of 2022, and we initiated during the start of the 2023-2024 session a legislative initiative and conducted rulemaking for the anti-deg implementation rule. That resulted in S-146 from that session, which I can talk a little bit more about. We didn't make it all the way through, obviously, we're here today, but the bill did pass out of the Senate. We refiled the anti-degradation implementation rule again in 2023 and went through the part of the rulemaking process pending that legislative initiative. So all of this work was around 3 elements. So we have the ability to reclassify, as I mentioned, when waters are, in the public interest. And so right now in 10 BSA 1259, there is a prohibition against on-site systems, think wastewater systems, greater than 1,000 gallons per day in Class A waters. And so the initiative was to limit that prohibition to those waters that are currently Class A. So all of those waters above 2,500 feet or the handful of waters that we have reclassified since then. It would require a site-specific analysis for those highest quality waters, our Class A and our Class B1 waters, through the anti-degradation implementation rule, whereby we would consider that higher quality when evaluating the proposed impact from an activity authorized by a permit. And it also required the agency to reclassify waters based exclusively upon our existing water quality. As O'Grady mentioned this morning, we have data that supports or would support reclassification of more than 100 surface waters, both lakes and streams, Class A1, Class B1. And so these 3 things together would, in essence, define the public interest as being reclassification, and through our anti-degradation analysis, rather than what is essentially determining what someone in a Class A watershed could do with their land, we would be better protecting our surface waters. Right now, none of our B2 waters have that prohibition. And in order to be able to really consider through anti-degradation that higher water quality, we need to have an efficient and comprehensive reclassification process. And so that's where we landed in terms of the work of that group and the agency's work. We still have the draft rule. That rulemaking lapsed because of the legislative initiative didn't make it through the House. So I wanted to just provide some of that background and context. I know, Chair Watson, this is somewhat familiar territory for you, but wanted to share that with the rest of the committee, and I'm happy to take any questions. I know we've got a very short period of time.
Yes, just a quick question, I missed the walkthrough of this bill, so is that what S-223 would do? It was the process that you need?
It would create a study group that would evaluate how to better protect our lakes. And that included, as I understand in the bill, documenting where the agency has data to support reclassification, evaluating what tools we have to better protect surface waters, including through anti-degradation. And then to provide a report on recommendations, whether they're rulemaking or legislative initiatives. The work that we had done several years ago with a stakeholder group outlined a potential path forward. But I really think that that crux is what is in the public interest. And it gets more complicated when you have a prohibition that affects what someone can do with their land. And that's something that we experienced when we reclassified 3 streams, that was initiated by a petition. And there were landowners within those watersheds that, while they supported reclassification overall, felt like it was unfair. That, without a clear nexus to water quality, why should they be restricted in what they can do with their land? They've been good stewards of that land. And stewards to the extent that it supported excellent water quality. And so that was where, at that point, the stakeholder group landed, and we had worked with a few legislators, but we were not successful at that point.
Thank you. And unfortunately, I think we do need to go.
Yeah.
But thank you, and more to come on this.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah,
And
thank you
without-
for having me.